Hey guys, tonight we are stepping barefoot into ancient Greece, not into the gleaming temples or marble forums, but into the muddy, soot-stained world of someone you've never heard of and definitely wouldn't want to trade places with. You are a humble roof tile maker in a backstreet of Athens. Somewhere around 430 BCE, the Parthenon is being built. Democracy is a thing. Philosophers are debating the meaning of life, and you're mostly debating whether your knees will survive another week of hauling clay. The good news, you're alive in the cradle of Western civilization. The bad news, you're sleeping in the drafty armpit of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me your local time and where you're listening from in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the sound of clucking hens and your own joints muttering threats. Your bed, if it can be called that, is a bundle of straw tied together with string, wedged into the corner of a one-room clay-walled home. It smells like mildew, sweat, and something vaguely egg-like that has no business being in a sleeping space. Your blanket is a woven linen sheet thinner than your patience, and during winter, it has all the warming power of a polite compliment. The house is small, so small that if you stretch, you might knock over your only bowl. There are no doors, only cloth curtains to flap in the breeze and let in the gossiping neighbors. There's no privacy. You live with your wife, 2 children, a goat that nobody asked for, and the persistent awareness that if you die, someone else will just take your spot in the kiln line by morning. At 22, you're already middle-aged by ancient standards, which explains the permanent backache, toothache, and soul ache. You've been making roof tiles since your early teens, shaping clay with your bare hands and baking it in open kilns that double as ovens for sunstroke. Your fingers are thick with calluses, your skin streaked with soot, and your sandals, if you're lucky enough to have them, are already starting to resemble ancient art installations. But don't worry, the day's just begun, and you've only stepped in one puddle of goat pee so far. It's important to remember that the ancient Greeks were brilliant at something's geometry, drama, philosophy, but personal comfort wasn't one of them. Your walls are clay, your roof is held up by ambition and luck, and your cooking fire is still smoldering from last night's watery barley soup. You've got no chimney, so smoke is your first meal of the day. Congratulations. Historians still argue whether the working poor in classical Athens felt pride in their trades or just accepted misery as the default wallpaper of existence. There's not much writing from roof tile makers themselves, probably because clay doesn't preserve thoughts as well as papyrus. But one thing is clear, the city runs on people like you. While the orators preach about virtue and the playwrights ponder tragedy, you're making the literal roof over their heads. And yet, if you ask for more barley in your pay, you'll be met with a laugh and a reminder that virtue begins in suffering. Very convenient. You cough as the smoke thickens, slap a flea off your leg, and rise from your bundle of straw. Outside, the sun is already bright, the street is already muddy, and a neighbor's chicken is already pecking your sandal string. You're ready to start today, or at least, too tired to resist it. The goat is the first to leave the house, not out of respect. Of course, just because the curtain flap door was swaying and she saw an opportunity. You follow, rubbing your eyes with clay-stained fingers. Stepping into a street that smells like a philosophical argument left out in the sun too long. Dust and smoke hang in the air, and someone across the alley is already shouting about olives. It's going to be one of those days. Your feet hit the dirt road, which is a generous term, It's more like a communal sponge made of mud, bits of broken amphorae, and whatever the neighbors dumped last night. The Athenian sewage system is minimal. You're meant to carry your waste outside the city walls, which sounds noble until you realize that outside might just mean 5 steps away and behind a bush. Historians still argue whether sanitation was treated as a civic duty or an inconvenient myth. You, like most people who don't have marble benches or slaves to carry chamber pots, do the same thing every morning. Grab the waste bucket, hold your breath, and march to the gutter behind your workshop. The smell. Let's call it mature. The splash. Let's not talk about the splash. Toilet paper, of course, is a fantasy. You've got a sponge on a stick. You keep it in a clay pot of vinegar, which seems sanitary until you realize your children use the same pot to dip figs. You don't talk about it. No one talks about it. Everyone just continues. Public toilets exist. Sure, communal stone benches with holes, but they're social spaces. People chat. They make eye contact. They talk about sports. Using one is less a private moment and more a surprise networking event for the lower class. If you want performance anxiety and a rash, they're perfect. Back at home, your wife has taken the children to collect water. It's an uphill walk with clay jugs balanced on their heads. You would help. But the kiln waits, and so does your supervisor. A man with the personality of a scorched fig. You'd call in sick. But there's no such thing as sick days when you're barely paid in lentils and hope. But for now, you squat in the alley, adjusting your tunic and hoping the neighbors have the decency not to make eye contact. A dog runs by with something in its mouth. You don't want to know what. The goat returns, smug. And somehow, this isn't even the worst part of the morning. You sigh, adjust your sandals, step over a puddle that might be wine, or might be something far less festive. Remember when you dreamed of being a hoplite warrior? Yeah, that dream lasted until your cousin returned from battle, missing most of his ear and all of his optimism. Roof tiles don't stab back. Still, your hands already ache. The calluses feel tight. You stretch your fingers, glance at the kiln smoke rising beyond the next row of huts, and remind yourself, one more day. Just get through one more day. And if the gods are kind, maybe no one will vomit into your clay again. You make your way toward the workshop, your stomach already sending out a quiet protest. Breakfast hasn't happened yet. And spoiler alert, it won't really happen so much as vaguely exist. But before that tragedy unfolds, nature calls again, because of course it does. And you realize you're not even remotely finished with the toilet drama. Let's talk about your workplace's facilities, or, more accurately, the complete lack of them. The toilet in your workshop is a corner behind a half wall, next to the woodpile, screened off with a curtain that has given up all hope of opacity. Spot is marked not by plumbing, but by smell. It's a place where dignity comes to die. There's a small hole in the ground, sort of. You dig it yourself, refill it once a week, and pretend that makes a difference. If you're feeling fancy, there's ash to sprinkle over it for odor control. If not, you just hope the wind is in your favor. Toilet breaks are public knowledge. There's no door to close, no privacy. And if your coworker Demetrios walks by while you're mid-squat, well, that's a story for the agora later. Toilets are, as the philosophers might say, a deeply participatory social experiment. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek workshops maintained any consistent system of waste disposal or whether workers just operated on a collective out of sight, out of nostril policy. Judging by the flies, it's the latter. The sponge on a stick is communal. That's right, communal. And before you ask, yes, it's stored in a pot of water and vinegar. And no, you don't get your own. You just hope the last user had the decency to rinse. Pro tip, don't check the pot too closely. What you don't see can't haunt you. Except it absolutely will. At 3 a.m. Oh, and once in a while, a rat climbs in. Sometimes it dies in there. No one removes it. You just sort of wait it out. Now, let's be fair. The wealthier classes had better options. They had latrines, some even with drainage systems that led to sewers. But those were luxuries for people who wore clean tunics and debated philosophy instead of hauling clay for a living. Even then, the wealthy weren't exactly living a Charmin Ultra lifestyle. Their toilet paper was still pebbles or pottery shards, just, color-coordinated ones. You finish your business and step out into the light like a prisoner granted parole. The goat greets you. The goat always greets you. You take a deep breath and immediately regret it. The air carries a medley of flavors smoke from the kiln, urine-soaked dust, and something fishy that has no right being this far from the docks. And yet, this is home. It's where you shape the clay that becomes rooftops, wine jars. And occasionally, if you mess up a really ugly sculpture, someone will try to sell as modern. A quick rinse from a jug. Your hands are never truly clean. But then, no one's are. In fact, clean is more of a philosophical ideal than a practical state of being. You shrug, wipe your fingers on your tunic, and prepare for the real work of the day. You just survived the toilet. You deserve a medal instead. You get a splinter. Your stomach is now staging a full protest march. It grumbles. It moans. It performs an interpretive dance of digestive despair, which can only mean one thing. It's time for breakfast. Or, as it's known in ancient Greece, Survival Theater Food Edition. You duck into the workshop's side room, where the meal waits in a cracked clay bowl. It's barley porridge. Again, because it's always barley porridge. It has the texture of wet sand and the flavor profile of a particularly forgettable poem. You chew because you must, not because you want to. And don't even think about fruit. That pear you saw at the market yesterday, a luxury item, reserved for philosophers, merchants, and people who can afford not to have 5 children. You, on the other hand, are working with week-old olives, half a chunk of goat cheese that smells like foot regret, and barley bread so hard you could use it as a roofing tile prototype. Actually, maybe you did. Drinks water is technically available if you trust streams full of frog parties and fish funerals. You don't. So it's watered-down wine. It doesn't hydrate you, so much as confuse your body into thinking it's trying. Historians still argue whether this habitual wine dilution was practical hydration or a cultural excuse to always be a little tipsy while suffering. There's no sugar. Of course, sweetness is the stuff of myths and honeybees with a social calendar. You once tried honey, years ago. It cost you half your sandals in a favor you still owe your cousin. You remember it like a dream, golden, thick, and no hint of charcoal. You lean against the wall as you chew. The kiln nearby crackles ominously, reminding you that the real heat hasn't started yet. And if you think your breakfast is depressing, imagine lunch. Lunch is yesterday's porridge, reborn through the miracle of indifference. Or, if someone's feeling ambitious, lentils, the ancient superfood, allegedly. They provide protein, fiber, and the unmistakable scent of regret. Sometimes they're cooked with garlic, sometimes with sadness. A coworker walks in and offers you a bite of dried fish. You accept, because politeness is free and you're already in pain. The fish tastes like salted stone and somehow still has bones. It cracks between your teeth like tiny curses. You nod. Delicious. You lie. He nods back. This is how friendships are born. Quirkier food options exist. There's garum, a fermented fish sauce so pungent it could be weaponized. It's considered a delicacy. You once spilled a drop of it on your tunic and had to burn the tunic. You glance at the workshop's pantry, which is a shelf with exactly 3 items: stale bread, olive oil, and a prayer. None of it looks promising. And then there's the ultimate cruelty: you made the bowl you're eating from. You shaped it. You smoothed it. You fired it. And now it holds the world's most forgettable meal. There's something existential in that. You finish your last bite, which tastes vaguely of ash and resignation. There's no dessert. There's barely digestion. But the day waits for no man, and especially not for a hungry one. Stretch your back, take one more sip of confused wine, and head out toward the kiln. Maybe today you'll be lucky. Maybe the fire won't backdraft. Maybe your boss will only yell once. You walk past the goat. It's eating a sandal. You nod in quiet respect. You step outside, full of barley porridge and ambition, ready to face the blistering furnace that is your daily grind. But just as your foot hits the courtyard dust, the wind picks up, and suddenly you remember another truth about life. As a roof tile maker in ancient Greece, your clothes hate you. Let's start with your tunic. It's wool, not wool blend, not merino, just wool, coarse, scratchy, home to its own civilization of microscopic hitchhikers. It itches like it holds a personal grudge. You wear it every day. You sleep in it. You work in it. You dream in it, which is ironic because it turns your dreams into itches. Historians still argue whether common laborers owned more than one tunic or simply rotated between front sweaty and back sweaty. The truth, you're pretty sure this tunic has become sentient. It clings in summer, freezes in winter, and smells like a goat's autobiography. Underwear, cute idea, not happening. Shoes, you'd love some. What you have is a pair of leather soles held together by ambition and 2 pieces of twine. They slap the ground with every step like a sarcastic applause. And they do nothing against the sharp pebbles littering the ground like ancient landmines. Every step is a choose-your-own blister adventure. Now let's talk hygiene. You'd wash your tunic if washing were a thing. But soap is expensive, and water is scarce. So instead, you sun-dry it, which, fun fact, just bakes in the sweat. Your idea of clean is when the dirt finally flakes off on its own. The workshop has a clothesline, but it's more decorative than functional, kind of like the temple columns after a particularly enthusiastic earthquake. If it rains, and it does, when you're least prepared, your tunic turns into a soggy wool trap, and you still have to wear it. Because there's no backup tunic waiting in a drawer. There are no drawers. The armpit holes have stretched into abstract art. The neckline is somewhere near your ribs. You could restitch it, but sewing needles cost money. And your hands are already full with clay, firewood, and existential dread. Let's not even start on parasites. Lice are your roommates. Fleas, your emotional support animals. You scratch, and then scratch the memory of scratching. You once counted 9 bug bites on one elbow. And that was a good day. You do have a hat, a conical thing made from straw. It's meant to keep off the sun, but mostly it acts as a portable oven for your scalp. Still, it's better than nothing. You've named it regret. You wipe your face with your sleeve, which is already damp. From what you don't know, could be sweat, could be goat sneeze. Either way, it now lives on your cheek. Clothing isn't a form of self-expression here. It's a form of mutual survival. Yours. And the bacteria colony that calls your tunic home. You glance at the wealthy merchant walking past. He's wearing a clean linen keaton dyed with expensive saffron. He smells like myrrh and confidence. You smell like fire and fermented goat. You nod politely. He doesn't nod back. But that's okay, because your shoes just broke. It starts as a dull throb in your jaw. You ignore it, because you're used to pain the way bakers are used to flour. But by the time the sun is overhead, the throbbing has turned into a steady pounding your mouth, performing a one-man percussion concert on the side of your skull. Welcome to ancient Greek dental care. Or, more accurately, the complete and utter absence of it. There is no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss, no dental clinic. The best you can do is chew on twigs, hope your breath doesn't offend the gods, and pray your teeth outlast your career, which, based on current labor conditions, means about 12 more months. Your gums are inflamed. One of your molars is loose. Every bite you take feels like a challenge. Every swallow like betrayal. You once bit into a fig and nearly saw the underworld. Historians still argue whether wealthier Greeks used powdered oyster shells and crushed charcoal to clean their teeth, or simply delegated oral hygiene to slaves. You use the ignore it until it kills you method. It's free, easy, and wildly unsuccessful. If you need a tooth removed, the village herbalist will happily oblige with pliers made of iron, rusty, and sterilized with what? A good vibe. You sit on a stool while two men hold you down, and the third pulls. There's no anesthetic, just a stick to bite down on, and a scream you will later deny was yours. Sometimes they pack the socket with garlic. Other times, wine-soaked wool. Neither helps. You just lie in your cot that night, shaking with fever and dreaming of a time when pain was just emotional. You once heard a rumor that in Athens, philosophers debate whether the soul resides in the heart, the brain, or the liver. You believe it resides in your mouth and is trying to escape. That sharp pain behind your eye, probably an abscess. Infections can kill, and they often do. The concept of bacteria won't be understood for another 2,000 years. In the meantime, you're being treated with leeches, bleeding, and hope your breath could knock out a horse. You try not to speak too closely to people, or at all. Socializing takes energy, and your jaw is on fire. You hold your face while working the kiln, pressing a palm to your cheek like it's holding your head together. At night, the pain gets worse. Your body slows down, and the ache speeds up. You shift side to side on your straw mat, trying to find a position that doesn't hurt. There isn't one. Your friend down the road, Theodoros, had all his teeth pulled by age 30. Now he drinks nothing but gruel and communicates through whistles. He's also the happiest man you know. Coincidence? Some say rubbing mint leaves on your gums helps. Others recommend honey and vinegar. You tried both. Now you just smell like minty pickles and feel exactly the same. You once heard a traveling doctor say that bad teeth were the punishment of the gods for ungrateful living. If that's true, the gods are extremely observant. You sit down on a broken stool near the clay bench and press your forehead to the cool bricks. For a moment, you pretend you're not here, not hurting, not gnawing slowly through your own enamel like a terrified rodent. A breeze picks up, carrying the scent of thyme and goat droppings. You open your mouth slightly, hoping the air will soothe you. It doesn't. Your coworker walks by, grinning with half a tooth. He hands you a date. It's soft, sweet, and the most dangerous thing you've seen all day. You take a bite anyway. You wake before the sun, because of course you do. Roof tiles don't make themselves. And even if they did, they'd still need someone to stack, fire, carry, and bleed on them. You stretch bad idea and rise to the soundtrack of your joints protesting like a badly tuned lyre. Work begins the moment your feet hit the dirt, and it doesn't stop. Not for meals, not for weather, not for the slow unraveling of your soul. You grab your tools, a wooden mold, a heavy clay paddle, and the kind of shovel that seems designed specifically to destroy spines. There's no ergonomic anything here, just raw, ancient muscle memory passed down from generations of people too busy surviving to invent labor unions. First job clay hauling. You lug buckets from the riverbank to the kiln yard, sloshing knee-deep through mud that has more in common with quicksand than pottery. Each bucket weighs roughly the same as your will to live. You spill some, you get yelled at, you keep going. Historians still argue whether tile-making workshops were state-run, family enterprises, or enslaved labor camps. Your back doesn't care. It just wants a softer century by mid-morning. Your tunic is soaked, not just with sweat, but with clay dust, kiln soot, and shame. You press clay into molds with practiced, aching hands. Smooth it, stamp it, stack it to dry, repeat. Then comes kiln duty. Ah yes, the kiln, a furnace so temperamental it could be considered a minor deity. You feed it wood, oxygen, and curses. The temperature inside climbs to over 900 degrees C, which, coincidentally, is also the approximate temperature of your patients. The heat warps everything in the air. Your tiles, your brain. You've hallucinated Zeus twice. He was unimpressed. The women in your life aren't resting either. Your mother spins wool in the corner, fingers blistered and shoulders tight. Your sister hauls water in clay jugs heavier than your ambition. Your neighbor is baking barley loaves and shouting at goats simultaneously. Multitasking, ancient edition. And then there are the children. Children don't get to play. They get to sweep, sort, scrub, and shiver. A 6-year-old boy beside you is stacking half-baked tiles. You ask him his name. He shrugs. He's missing 2 teeth and probably a few dreams. The lunch bell, it's called if you're still alive. Eat something. You sit on a rock, chew last night's barley crust, and stare blankly into the dust. You don't talk much. Conversation requires energy. Energy is not available in your region. You hear of other trades, blacksmiths, tanners, coopers, all different tools, same broken backs. You once tried farming. Your crops died. You took the hint. A traveling poet once came to town. He sang of glory, of love, of Athens, of wine. You gave him a tile. He looked confused. You walked away. By late afternoon, your hands are trembling. Your eyes sting from smoke. You burned your wrist. Again. You wrap it in wool and keep going, because stopping is not an option, not unless you want to explain yourself to your supervisor, who looks like he was carved out of regret and olive pits. You finish stacking the day's batch. You breathe in ash. You cough. You realize you haven't blinked in half an hour. And then you sweep the yard. Because labor is not an event here. It is the air you breathe, the food you chew, the weight on your chest when you try to sleep. It is the price of surviving a little longer in a world that doesn't care if you do. The sun is setting. Your shift is over, which just means it's time to haul firewood for tomorrow. You'd think after all that, at least the weather might give you a break. Maybe a gentle breeze, a cool drizzle, something poetic. But no, in ancient Greece, the weather is less of a background element and more of a cruel older sibling with a magnifying glass and the sun. Today is summer. How do you know? Because the sun is trying to kill you personally. The roof tiles you stack could fry an egg in under a minute. You, meanwhile, are the egg. Your tunic sticks to your back like betrayal, and sweat drips down your face in sad little rivers of despair. You duck under a bit of shade if a slanted plank tied to a pole counts as shade, and sip warm water that tastes like regret. The heat bakes everything, your lungs, your thoughts, even your goat, who lies belly up like it's filing for divine intervention. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek houses were designed to combat the heat or simply accept defeat and melt. In winter, of course. It's a different flavor of suffering. You huddle beneath a single wool blanket in a stone room that leaks wind like a philosophical sieve. You sleep curled up like a shrimp, next to the goat again, trying not to admit that she's warmer than your family. Your house is made of mud bricks, wood beams, and sheer optimism. It's better than a tent, but only just. In summer, it becomes a sauna. In winter, a meat locker. There's no insulation, no firewood left. You tried to chop olive branches last week and nearly got lynched by your neighbor, who considers his trees sacred, or at least extremely flammable. There is no weatherproof clothing. You own one tunic. It is not seasonal. It is a one-size-suffers-all garment. You can't wash it regularly, because water is a luxury and soap is mostly mythical. So it stiffens with use, like emotional baggage. If it rains, it gets heavier. If it dries, it gets scratchier. You don't win. Sandals don't even ask. You made yours from discarded rope and boiled leather. They offer the same protection as a philosophical argument during a bar fight. Your feet are cracked, blistered, sunburned, and somehow still cold at night. Wind it howls, rain it floods, snow rare. But when it hits, the city shuts down in confusion. No one knows what to do. You wrap yourself in spare cloth and lie there wondering if hypothermia counts as a civic holiday. You once heard that philosophers debated whether weather was punishment from the gods or simply nature being itself. You think the answer is yes. And let's not forget insects. Summer comes with mosquitoes, gnats, and the kind of flies that treat your sweat as an all-you-can-drink symposium. You swat, you scratch, you contemplate your life choices. Still, you get up every day. You light the kiln. You haul the tiles. You breathe the smoke. You nod politely to your goat, who judges you from the shade. Because here's the thing. Weather isn't just background noise. It's your coworker, your enemy, your worst customer. It's in your lungs, your clothes, your bones. It wakes you up and tucks you in, and it doesn't care what plans you had for the day. Tomorrow might be worse, but at least tomorrow, you'll be too tired to notice. And now, finally, we arrive at the most basic of needs, one so essential, so life-affirming, so utterly disastrous in ancient Greece. Water? You crouch beside the communal cistern, trying to scoop your share before it's all gone. The water is warm, faintly green, and tastes like a philosophical debate gone wrong. You drink it anyway. Because if you don't, you'll pass out before lunch. If you do, well, historians still argue whether dysentery was more common than religious epiphanies. Bathing. That's hilarious. You bathe approximately once a week, if you're lucky. And by bath, we mean standing in a wooden tub that leaks, scrubbing yourself with rough sand, and hoping the neighbors aren't watching. Soap is olive oil mixed with ash, which is exactly as fun as it sounds. And no, it doesn't smell like eucalyptus and lemongrass. It smells like poor choices. But bathing is dangerous too. Open pores, according to local wisdom. Let illness in. That's right. The cleaner you are, the more vulnerable you become. Hygiene is basically Russian roulette. The cleaner you are, the likelier you are to die. You consider not washing again. You've heard rumors of public baths in Athens, places where rich men soak, chat, and get massages from slaves. You've also heard rumors of centaurs. Neither exists in your world, back home. Your only real water source is the nearby river. But the river is also where people wash clothes, dump waste, toss fish guts, and occasionally bathe their donkeys. You dip your bucket in anyway, because what choice do you have? You tried boiling water once, then you ran out of firewood, then you ran out of patience. Now, you just strain it through your teeth and hope the protozoa go easy on your intestines. Toilets. We've covered that Greek innovation. Public latrines do exist, stone benches with holes. No dividers, no shame, and absolutely no toilet paper. Just a sponge on a stick, shared communally and rinsed in vinegar between uses. You try not to think about it. You try even harder not to make eye contact. Waterborne diseases are a fact of life. Cholera, dysentery, intestinal worms, the whole celebrity lineup of ancient pathogens. Children grow up with chronic diarrhea. Adults just grow used to it. You keep working, even while dehydrated, even while sweating out your regrets. Because the kiln won't fire itself. In moments of reflection, you remember that water was sacred once. You leave small offerings at the shrine near the well olive pits, broken tiles, whispered prayers. You ask the gods not for abundance, but for mercy, for water that doesn't kill, for one day without stomach cramps. And sometimes, just sometimes, after a hard rain, you catch a few drops in your hands, fresh cold, falling from the sky like a forgotten miracle. You drink it. You savor it. You remember what clean water is supposed to taste like. And then it's gone. The kiln has gone quiet now. Tiles are cooling in the dark, and your feet, dust-caked and blistered, have finally stopped throbbing. Your tunic clings like a memory of the day, and the smoky air settles around you like an old friend. Outside, the wind is softened, and even the goat seems to sigh. You sit beneath the stars, the ones the philosophers swore mapped our souls, and let your breath slow. The aches remain, the itch, the hunger, the thirst, but for now, they're distant. The night wraps around your shoulders like a blanket of silence, and for a few long, quiet minutes, there's nothing to do. No tiles to haul, no water to boil, no sandals to repair, just the whisper of time and the cool rhythm of ancient sleep. So close your eyes now. Let the dust of the day settle. Let the stars flicker like tiny oil lamps in the sky. The worst is over for today, at least. You've survived another sunrise to sunset in ancient Greece. And in this moment, that's enough. Now, we drift under the long shadows of a cypress tree, thin, tall, and clearly harboring secrets. The air is still, except for that whisper of wind that feels like it's deliberately avoiding you. Somewhere between wakefulness and memory, you find yourself lying on ancient Persian tiles, beneath painted ceilings and stories people once whispered like prayers. You would never think that romance could bloom in someone's sleep. But apparently, Persians did. In fact, they built entire gardens, geometric, scented gardens with canals to mimic paradise. And into this carefully designed Eden steps a prince. Not a metaphorical one, a real one, with too much silk and even more poetry. He dreams of a girl beneath this very tree. She says nothing, but her presence has that annoying effect of making every real woman seem boring, which, by medieval standards, might mean she doesn't disappear at sunrise or emit moonlight. Every morning, the prince wakes up sulky and distracted. He stops eating dates. He cancels falcon hunting appointments. His astrologers grow nervous because, back then, love wasn't just a feeling. It was a possible curse, a diplomatic inconvenience, or both. Historical fact: Persian royalty and nobility were well versed in dream symbolism. Dreams weren't just subconscious doodles. They were legitimate omens, like an email from the divine, written in metaphor and low lighting. So naturally, when the prince keeps dreaming of the same girl, everyone starts writing it down. He starts planting more cypress trees, thinking maybe she'll show up again. Because if you can't find love, you can always landscape aggressively until it finds you. Weeks pass, months. The girl reappears in a dream, but now she's crying. He asks her name. She doesn't speak. She simply holds out a folded piece of linen embroidered with stars. When he wakes, the fabric is in his bed. Not kidding. Quirky detail. Some early Sufi poets believed spiritual love could manifest physical objects through dreams, especially cloth or thread, which represented fate. Like Etsy orders from the soul. Naturally, the prince now believes he's destined to find her in real life. The court panics. Marriages are supposed to seal treaties, not follow embroidered textiles. They bring in theologians. One argues it's a metaphor for divine longing. Another says it's an actual woman lost between worlds. Yet another suggests the prince just needs better sleep hygiene. Historians still argue whether this tale reflected real court traditions of dream-based matchmaking, or if it was simply the medieval version of a very poetic hallucination. Either way, the story spread. Eventually, the prince orders a cypress grove built in her image, complete with night-blooming jasmine, crescent-shaped pools, and tiles that reflect starlight. He sits there every dusk, hoping she'll cross the veil again. Sometimes, he swears he hears her laughter in the rustle of leaves. And you, half asleep under your blanket, wonder if the tree outside your window has ever whispered back. You wake to the sound of gulls, not the angry city ones that steal your lunch, but the mystical ones, gliding over misted cliffs somewhere far west, Celtic west. You're wrapped in wool now, slightly itchy, standing barefoot in dew-soaked grass. The fog is deliberate here, like it's been rehearsed. You're waiting, apparently, because that's what lovers in Celtic myth often do: wait. For lifetimes, for curses to lift, for seals to return to shore as women. You would never think that eternal love required this much weather, but it does, and also, frequently, shape-shifting. Tonight's dreamlike tale, the legend of Lyadan and Querether. Not a power couple, by modern standards. More like broody poet meets mystical nun. And yes, you are expected to root for them. She's brilliant. A bard, which in early medieval Ireland was basically an elite verbal athlete who could rhyme insults so sharply. Your livestock might die. He hears her poetry, falls instantly. And who could blame him? She speaks like the wind scolds mountains. But of course, there's a problem. Lyadan isn't into marriage. She's into spiritual purity, prophetic dreams, and controlling her own fate. And Querether, the romantic, is, well, a little basic. He proposes. She says no, then feels guilty, then says yes. But they don't marry. They simply wander together, compose verses, sleep in the same cells but not the same blankets. Medieval Irish loved this kind of thing. Emotional tension marinated in guilt, faith, and weather. Mainstream fact, early Celtic Christianity blended older Druidic customs with monastic vows, leading to saints who rode stags and poets who levitated during prayer. There were rules, but also exceptions, especially for those who wrote beautiful laments. So Lyadan writes a poem predicting doom if they consummate their love. Spoiler, she's right. They try to live apart. She joins a convent. But he shows up in her visions, wet from storms, haunted by loneliness, annoying as ever. He becomes a wandering ghost of affection. Eventually, they agree to one last meeting, in silence, seated across from each other, separated by a river. It's so romantic it hurts. Or maybe it's just a wool tunic. Either way, you can't look away. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe their final meeting inspired monastic rituals of non-verbal communion, where two souls sit in spiritual yearning without speaking, like ancient Zoom calls without Wi-Fi. And yes, historians still argue whether Lyadan and Querether were real people, legendary composites, or just literary stand-ins for unfulfilled yearning made fashionable by 9th century clergy. Either way, their story was copied into countless manuscripts by candlelight. Because what better to read in a storm than a romance that goes absolutely nowhere? You feel the fog curling around your legs again. That same mist that once separated lovers, cloaked nuns, and swallowed final words before they could be said. Somewhere in the distance, a harp plays one note, then disappears. You blink, and suddenly the fog lifts, but not to sunshine. Instead, it parts to reveal a desert, dry and infinite, golden and sweltering. Your wool cloak is gone. In its place, sand sticking to your sweat, and the faint smell of rosewater. You're not in Celtic myth anymore. You've been invited gently but insistently into the Persian world of shadowed gardens and fate-heavy romance. You're now wandering Shiraz. Not modern Shiraz with cars and rooftop cafes, but 12th century Shiraz. with moonlit courtyards, tiled fountains, and the low hum of forbidden poetry. The kind whispered from balconies and scrawled in margins of Quranic commentaries. You're not here for theology, though. You're here for Layla and Majnun. Yes, that Layla and that Majnun. The Middle Eastern answer to Romeo and Juliet. Except with more verses, more camels, and far fewer questionable teenagers making impulsive decisions in crypts. It begins, innocently enough, with schoolyard glances. Layla and Case Majnun's real name fall for each other while memorizing letters and stealing looks between inkpots. You would never think that puppy love could derail entire tribes, but here we are. Kays writes poems about her. At first, it's charming, then staley, then hourly, then aggressively unhinged. He recites her name under trees, on rooftops, in front of her father, who, shockingly, does not find this cute. Layla is locked away. Kays is exiled. And from that moment on, he's no longer Kays. He becomes Majnun possessed. The desert claims him. He lives among animals, eats roots, writes poems in the sand, which the wind dutifully erases. You know, the usual courtship method. Mainstream historical fact. Majnun's tale became one of the 5 great Persian Masnavi epics, shaping love poetry from Andalusia to Delhi. Even Rumi quoted him, though with less sand and more spiritual metaphors. Fringe tidbit, according to some tellings, Majnun refused water unless it came from a well Layla had once walked past. Others say he spoke to goats. Poets, as always, walk the fine line between genius and very, very weird. And historians still argue whether Majnun was a real person or just a literary device, an archetype of divine madness. A Sufi metaphor in poetic robes. Either way, his love was considered sacred because it demanded everything and gave nothing back, like a sentient mobile data plan. Layla, meanwhile, is married off to someone else, a rich nobleman. Unfortunate. She remains loyal, but societal norms being what they were, she's effectively erased. Her voice, what little we hear, is elegiac, resigned, endlessly tragic. Eventually, Layla dies. Majnun visits her grave and promptly joins her poetically. Of course, no daggers, just sorrow, sand, and whispered verses that still float around Persian gardens during jasmine season. And you're still standing in that garden. Or maybe you're the garden, a place where longing lingers longer than anyone expects, and words stay warm for centuries. You step away from the rose-scented graves of Persia and drift northwest into damp hills, smoky hearths, and tales thick as fog. You're in Celtic territory now, where love is not just doomed, it's cursed, shape-shifted, and frequently underwater. The story greeting you here isn't embroidered on silk or whispered by poets. It's sung loudly, badly, and with ale on someone's breath. Because this is the tale of Dirmad and Grania, a love triangle so dramatic it makes soap operas look like dental appointments. You find yourself in a wooden mead hall. The fire flickers. The boar is roasted. And old King Fionn Mac Cumhale is eyeing a much too young bride. Grania, daughter of the High King, is promised to him. She's beautiful, clever, and most importantly, absolutely not interested in marrying a man old enough to remember the invention of spoons. So she hatches a plan, as Celtic women often do when faced with patriarchal matchmaking. She slips a sleeping potion to the entire wedding party and places a magical guise, a kind of enchanted obligation on Dirmad, one of Fionn's strongest warriors. Basically, you're cute. You now have no choice but to elope with me. And he does. Because love in Celtic myth isn't something you fall into. It's something that chases you across the country, armed with curses, boars, and the wrath of aging kings. Mainstream fact, this tale is part of the Fianna cycle, a cornerstone of Irish mythology that blends history, legend, and enough man drama to fill 3 HBO seasons. It was passed down orally for centuries before being written down in Middle Irish. Now, for the quirky fringe, Diarmid has a magic mole, not a spy, a literal mole on his body that makes women fall instantly in love with him. Yes, you read that right. A mole. Historians still argue whether it's a symbol of supernatural allure or just medieval Ireland's version of a six-pack. You now find yourself in a forest. Not the soft, fairy-lit kind. This one is wet, cold, and smells like moss and regret. Diarmid and Grania are on the run, chased by Fionn and his warriors. They sleep under trees, hide in caves, eat questionable berries, and try not to die. Romantic. Everywhere they go, Diarmid builds a love nest only for Grania to demand they move again the next day. Either she's paranoid, or he's terrible at picking Airbnbs. The two grow weary, and you can almost feel their clothes clinging to their skin with damp sadness. Eventually, Fionn calls a truce. Diarmid is allowed to live if he promises never to sleep with Grania again. We all know how well those pacts go. They settle into domestic obscurity for a few chapters until Fionn invites Diarmid on a friendly boar hunt. Spoiler, it's not friendly. A boar gores Diarmid. Fionn has healing water, but lets it slip through his fingers twice before Diarmid dies. You would never think dying from boar wounds while your ex-father-in-law stands nearby with a magical Gatorade would be a thing. But welcome to the 12th century. And there you are, beside Grania, now truly alone. Mourning a man chosen by magic, hunted for love, and undone by pettiness. It's cold, but not just from the weather. Now, we descend into something hazier. A Celtic myth that feels like it was dreamt by a bard after too much fermented honey. The air here tastes like mist, and even the trees lean closer, as if trying to listen. You wander into the tale of Athens, the woman who spends most of her mythological career being transformed, married, reborn, and then accidentally married again, this time to her former husband's grandson. Yes, the Celts invented the romantic plot twist long before prestige television. Athens begins her journey as a radiant immortal. Born among the Tuatha De Danann, the ancient fairy folk of Ireland, she's admired for her beauty and grace, which, in mythology, is the fastest route to disaster. Midir, a lord of the other world, falls hopelessly in love with her, naturally. His wife Fuamnach is less than thrilled. So what does Fuamnach do? Files for separation, attends therapy? Of course not. She turns Athens into a pool of water. Then a worm. Then a butterfly. Because apparently nothing says I'm emotionally stable like prolonged, vindictive transmogrification. Mainstream fact. The tale of Athens comes from Tokmark Athene, the wooing of Athens, one of the oldest and most poetic sagas in Irish literature, preserved in the 12th century Yellow Book of Lecan. Here's your quirky twist as a butterfly. Athens doesn't just flutter about. She haunts Midir's palace for years, resting on his shoulder, sipping from his cup, refusing to die. Eventually, Fuamnach whips up a storm so violent that it blows Athens into the mortal world, where she falls quite literally into the cup of a queen and is reborn as her daughter. You would never think reincarnation by beverage would be a plot device, but again, Celtic myth isn't here to comfort you. So now, Athens is mortal, again, and the centuries roll by like fog across the moors. She grows up human, beautiful once more, and surprise catches the attention of Eochaid Aram, the High King of Ireland. They marry. Life seems almost normal, which of course means chaos is just behind the door. Enter Midir, still in love, and only slightly discouraged by the fact that his immortal wife is now a mortal queen who doesn't remember him. He challenges Eochaid to a board game called Fitchel, a sort of ancient Celtic chess, but adds a twist if he wins. He gets a kiss from Athens. Eochaid agrees and loses. Because the first rule of Celtic folklore is never gamble with a man who brings his own board. When Medea steps forward to claim his kiss, Athens complies, and the moment their lips touch, they vanish into thin air. Gone. No forwarding address. Historians still argue whether this myth is about the fluidity of love, the power of memory, or just a long-form cautionary tale about not borrowing from your ex. You linger in the now empty throne room. The fire crackles. The king is stunned. And Athens, poor Athens, is once again pulled into a cycle of love, loss, and magic beyond her choosing. You can almost hear the flutter of invisible wings as she disappears. Now, we cross a cultural bridge back to Persia, where the night smells like rosewater and the air practically hums with poetry. And if you're thinking, surely we've had enough doomed Persian love, I'm sorry to report not even close. Enter the story of Shirin and Khosrow, a romance so convoluted that it makes modern love triangles look like polite misunderstandings. You don't just fall in love here, you compose odes about it while riding horseback across emperors. Shirin is a Christian Armenian princess. Khosrow is a Sasanian prince with a flair for drama and a bad habit of getting exiled. Their courtship starts, as all great relationships do, with mutual admiration at a distance. Khosrow hears of Shirin's beauty and sends gifts. Shirin hears of Khosrow's poetry and maybe swoons a little. Then they both set off to meet each other, but take opposite routes and manage to miss each other entirely. Yes, they literally ride past each other on the same road, like ships in the desert. Mainstream fact. Their tale is immortalized in Nizami's 12th century Persian epic, Khosrow and Shirin, which blends pre-Islamic legend with Islamic poetic tradition. It was beloved by rulers, scholars, and people who thought love should involve more endurance than a triathlon. Here's your quirky bit. At one point, Shirin bathes in a pool naked in the middle of a valley, and Khosrow just watches from a hill. Not exactly meet cute, but apparently enough to kick off another cycle of emotional chaos. Nizami presents it like a poetic metaphor. Modern audiences might call it creepy binocular behavior. Eventually, they reunite, sort of. Khosrow's life keeps getting complicated by wars, betrayals, and rivals, including Shirin's other suitor, Farhad. A sculptor so lovesick he literally carves a mountain for her. Did she ask for a mountain? No. Did Farhad do it anyway? Absolutely. And then, in a move that cements him as the original nice guy archetype, he dies of heartbreak when Khosrow tricks him into thinking Shirin is dead. Because who hasn't used psychological warfare to win over a crush, historians still argue whether the tale is purely allegorical or partially based on real royal figures from the Sasanian Empire. Either way, the emotional mileage is undeniable. Eventually, Shirin and Khosrow do marry, but only after years of separation, sabotage, and political instability. Think Romeo and Juliet, but with more Persian architecture and fewer poisoned misunderstandings. They finally share a palace, for a time, at least. But peace never lasts in these stories. Jealousy brews, power shifts, and eventually, Khosrow is murdered by his own son, which, yes, feels excessive even by ancient royal family standards. Shirin, in mourning, takes her own life beside his grave. Some say she did it out of love. Others say she did it out of despair. Or maybe just to escape a lifetime of men sending her mountains and mixed signals. You sit beside the moonlit mausoleum, listening to the rustle of wind in the cypress trees. Somewhere, a carved mountain still stands silent proof that love can be dramatic, impractical, and carved entirely out of stone. Now, we cross the misty sea to the wind-swept cliffs of the Celtic world, where myths don't politely unfold. They crash over you like a storm. You stand at the edge of a loch. It's dusk. The water ripples with things unsaid and possibly things undead. Because now, you're meeting Care Ebermeith, a woman who's a swan by day and a heartache by night. Yes, swan. as in feathery, honking, floating. Tragic beauty. You would never think that shape-shifting into a waterfowl could earn you suitors. But Celtic mythology begs to differ. Care appears in the Dream of Oengus, one of the oldest Irish romantic tales. Oengus, a god of youth and love, sees her in his sleep standing beside a lake with silver chains and no explanation. He immediately does what anyone would do. When falling in love, in their REM cycle, he wakes up obsessed, refuses to eat, moans dramatically. Sounds familiar. Historical fact. Celtic lore often used dreams as a bridge between realms. Oengus's vision wasn't a mere dream. It was divine intel. So his father, the Dagda, a god who's basically a druid dad, cosmic influence, goes on a pan-Irish goose chase, tracking down lakes, castles, and any girl with feathered friends. Eventually, they find Care at a lake called the Dragon's Mouth, chained among 150 other girls, all swans, but not ugly ducklings. These girls turn into humans on Samhain, the Celtic New Year, for just one night. And here's the rule. If Oengus can identify Care among the swans, she'll marry him. Which sounds fair until you remember they all look like swans. He manages it. Because love. Or maybe plot armor. Then he does something more romantic than flowers or poetry. He turns into a swan himself. Together, they fly off across the lake, singing so beautifully that every listener falls asleep. Quirky tidbit. Swans in Irish myth are often linked to the soul. Killing one could doom your afterlife, which made lake hunting a very cautious affair. Also, no pressure if your girlfriend turns into a bird every morning. Historians still argue whether Caer represents a fertility goddess or an early symbol of death and rebirth cycles. Some even suggest she's a proto-Morrigan figure, less war, more wistfulness. Regardless, Caer and Oengus stay together, sort of. She stays a swan half the year, human the rest. He builds a dreamlike palace along the Boyne River, known for music, mists, and general moonlit drama. You know, the usual dating lifestyle when one partner is semi-avian. You sit quietly now, imagining their white feathers brushing the sky, the echo of their song bouncing off the hills. And maybe, just maybe, you think about the person who flits through your dreams and wonder if they, too, have wings just out of reach. You step further into the Celtic mist, and this time the ground itself feels different, less like soil, more like memory. Because now, you're meeting Athenian, the woman who was born twice, married twice, and blown across centuries by a very jealous breeze. You would never think that reincarnation, kidnapping, and magical storms could all fit inside one romance. But in Irish mythology, there are no small plot twists, only increasingly unhinged ones. Athenian starts off as a fairy, beautiful, kind, and unfortunately married to the king of the Tuatha De Danann, Midir. But things go south when Midir's first wife, Fuamnach, discovers he's upgraded spouses. Instead of writing a sad poem or burning his tunics, Fuamnach practices ancient magic with the subtlety of a nuclear swan dive. She turns Athenian into a puddle. Yes, a literal puddle of water, then a worm. Then, after many mythological mood swings, Athenian becomes a butterfly. Now you're a butterfly, which is already rough. But Fuamnach doesn't stop there. She whips up a magical storm to blow butterfly Athenian around Ireland for 7 years. Like a living pollen allergy, she eventually lands in the cup of a mortal queen, and, plot twist, is reborn as a human. Mainstream historical fact, Irish myths reflect a pre-Christian world where souls and identities weren't strictly linear. You could be reborn, enchanted, or relocated into a cow without much explanation. It's less about logic, more about spiritual elasticity. Anyway, Athenian grows up beautiful again and ends up marrying a mortal king, Eochaid. But Midir, her original fairy husband, finds her and goes, "Hey, remember me? You were a butterfly." Understandably, she does not. So Midir proposes a very normal plan. He challenges her new husband to a game of Fitchel, a Celtic board game that historians still haven't fully decoded, part chess, part war simulation, part divorce lawyer. Midir wins and asks for a kiss from Athene as his prize. One kiss later, he turns her back into a fairy, and they disappear through the palace ceiling. Open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Athene's tale is a warning about fate, an allegory for seasonal cycles, or just a flex on how wild storytelling could get before Netflix. Some even suggest it preserves remnants of early mother goddess worship, where beauty and nature were interchangeable. Quirky tidbit. Athene's butterfly phase became so iconic that medieval Irish scribes would doodle wings beside her name in manuscripts. And there's a hill in County Meath still called Brú na Hoitina Athene's Mound. You sit now with your eyes half closed, imagining the wind that once carried a fairy-turned butterfly through moonlit meadows. You wonder what it's like to fall in love across lifetimes, to lose yourself to magic, and to be remembered in the wind long after your name is whispered last. Now, we drift into one final story, a tale that's less about one person and more about the thin, fluttering curtain between love and myth. You lie back in your imaginary mossy nook as the night deepens, and a slow hush settles over both Persian deserts and Celtic glades. This time, the tale is fractured, repeated, whispered between cultures. It's the dream lover myth, and it appears everywhere but tonight. It's filtered through Persian and Celtic twilight. You would never think that two places so far apart could fall in love with the same idea, but they do, in both traditions. There is a haunting belief that you can fall in love with someone who appears in your dream, and not just once, over and over. You see them, speak to them, maybe even weep into their imagined shoulder. And then you wake up and you miss them as if they were real. In medieval Persia, this shows up in poetry, in particular, in the Layla and Majnun tradition, where Majnun, meaning possessed, loses his grip on reality, wandering deserts, murmuring poems for the woman he met only in glimpses and dreams. He writes verses that make birds pause and walls weep, but he cannot have her. They are fated, not formed. Meanwhile, across the cold Irish coastline, stories grow about Angus, a god of love who sees a mysterious girl in his dreams. Every night, she calls to him, her hair woven with firelight, her music soft and golden. He searches the land for her. Years pass. Finally, he finds her Caer Ebormaith, a woman who becomes a swan by day. Naturally, to marry her, Angus turns into a swan too. They fly off together, two silhouettes vanishing against an autumn sky. Because of course they do. The historical truth. These stories help people explain longing, obsession, or the sensation of being haunted by a love that never quite arrives. You didn't need to be married to suffer. You just had to dream. Fringe tidbit. In 13th century Iran, dream divination was a booming business. People paid scribes to interpret romantic dreams, hoping to uncover secret messages from the beyond, or, more importantly, hints about attractive strangers. And historians still argue whether these dream lover myths were meant as cautionary tales about fantasy, or gentle encouragements to follow the heart beyond logic. The fire dies down now. Your eyes blur the horizon between real and imagined. The dream is still warm in your hand. And you realize, perhaps with a sleepy smile, that some love stories are not made for waking hours. They belong here, in the dark velvet space where dreams and myths lie curled together like kittens. So, just let the ancient winds of poetry wrap around you. Let the swans sing. Let the desert whisper. You're not meant to understand everything. Only to rest. Only to float. Only to breathe in stories older than sleep. Now, we begin in the biting silence of a Norwegian morning in the year 923. You wake up under a fur that smells suspiciously like wet dog and regret. The longhouse creaks around you as the wind breathes through gaps in the timber, as if the house itself is tired of trying to keep you warm. You press your hand to your chest and watch your own breath curl in the air, like your soul trying to escape to somewhere with proper heating. You would never think that your biggest problem today wouldn't be the cold, but the face you saw in your dream. The stranger's face, repeated, vivid, vaguely glowing. And unfortunately, in this corner of the Viking world, that kind of thing is a problem. You roll over onto your side, trying to shake it off. But in the back of your mind, you already know the whispers will start by midday. Did you dream last night? One neighbor will ask. Not casually, not in that, ooh, how funny kind of tone. No, this is serious business. And if you say yes, someone somewhere might already be sewing a wedding tunic, possibly yours. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now in your world back in 10th century Norway? The lines between reality and dream were about as blurry as the inside of a mead horn after a long night. Dreams were not passive entertainment. They were fate, omen, previews of obligations you didn't ask for. Think of it like your subconscious sending you wedding invitations with no RSVP option. You pull on your woolen tunic, which is as itchy as it is necessary, and head outside to grab water. It's a 200-meter walk, barefoot, through snow, with a bucket that's been repaired more times than your dignity. And as you walk, you think about the face again, the stranger's eyes, their name. Did they even have one? Would it count historically speaking? This isn't you being dramatic. Icelandic and Norse sagas repeatedly show characters taking dreams very seriously. Some even change their entire life plans because of them. One man became a sea captain after dreaming of a woman whispering the word north. Another married a widow he'd never met simply because she appeared in his sleep 3 nights in a row wearing a crown. Coincidence? The villagers thought not. And yes, historians still argue whether these dream-driven decisions were folklore devices, spiritual experiences, or early signs of sleep deprivation caused by shared beds and zero soundproofing. But what's not up for debate is this in Viking Age culture. Dreams meant something, maybe too much. You toss your bucket into the frozen stream and hear the clunk of ice before water. And there, in the faintest reflection, is the face again, glowing, familiar. Maybe you imagined it. Or maybe tomorrow, someone's going to knock on your door and say, "We heard you're getting married. Sleep well." They said, "Dream big." They said, no one warned you your subconscious might propose on your behalf. The problem with dream marriages in 10th century Norway is that you don't get to opt out with a polite, "It's not you, it's my subconscious." Because once a dream spreads, once your cousin's cousin's wife's brother claims they saw you wandering the spirit world hand in hand with someone wearing a gold circlet, you're halfway to being fitted for ceremonial shoes made of bark, and you haven't even had breakfast yet. You head back toward the longhouse, water sloshing, your thoughts already racing. The face from your dream wasn't anyone local. You're sure of that. No farmer, no smith, no goat-shearing widow. This was someone different. Maybe nobility, maybe dead. Let's not dwell on that. Not before porridge. Inside. Your aunt is stirring oats, like she's plotting something. She gives you that look. The one that says, "I heard you muttering names in your sleep again." You try to play it cool. Classic Viking repression. But the room smells suspiciously of wedding herbs, lavender, thyme, and the scent of destiny. Mainstream Norse belief treated dreams as divine messages, sometimes from the gods, sometimes from fate itself. Odin was said to send visions to mortals he found interesting, which is a kind way of saying he likes stirring the pot. If Odin were alive today, he'd run a gossip blog and crash weddings just for the drama. But it wasn't just gods. Seeresses called Valur held real influence. These women interpreted dreams, read omens, and sometimes made terrifyingly specific predictions about who would marry whom and what the cow would do next harvest. So naturally, when you start having vivid visions of a stranger whispering your name from a snow-covered hill, you become interesting. Volur level interesting. The quirky part, Norse sagas record at least one story where a man claims he escaped a marriage by pretending he never dreamed. He faked sleep. He coughed loudly during dream interpretation rituals. It worked for 3 weeks until the local goat got involved. Historians still argue whether this tale was satire, a cautionary parable, or just a medieval Norse stand-up routine involving livestock. You sip your porridge slowly, hoping to absorb its emotional stability. Your younger cousin is already sewing something. It's white. It has embroidered runes. You ask her what it's for. She smiles. You do not. In this world, marriage isn't just romance or politics, it's prophecy. And when the line between reality and vision blurs, no one wants to risk ignoring the gods. What if that dream stranger is your fated spouse? What if ignoring them means bad crops, dead fish, or a storm that tears the roof off the mead hall mid-toast? So now you're staring into a bowl of lukewarm oats, contemplating your next move. Deny the dream, embark on a quest to find the mystery figure, or lean into the madness and hope for love. One thing's for certain, the next time someone says, "Follow your dreams," you might respond by screaming into a sheepskin. There's no official job application for dream spouse, but apparently you've already been shortlisted. By mid-morning, and the whispers have spread beyond the longhouse. Down at the fjord's edge, fishwives are giggling suspiciously. An old man carving driftwood gives you the side eye. And even the village dogs seem to sniff you like you're glowing with cosmic romantic doom. You were hoping for a quiet day, hauling timber or untangling fishing nets. Instead, you're a Norse tabloid headline, "Local Sleeps with Stranger Spiritual Edition." And things are only getting weirder. Because now, the vulva has arrived. She appears at the village gate like a plot twist. No horse, no entourage, just her and a staff carved with serpents, her cloak looking like it was stitched by thunderclouds. You know this isn't good. Valur don't show up to congratulate you on emotional growth. They show up when fate is having a mood swing. She walks straight toward your family's longhouse. Doesn't knock, just enters, nods once, and sits. The room falls silent like a snowstorm landing. She speaks your name like it's older than fire. "Here we go." She asks questions. Not soft ones like. "How are you feeling?" but questions like. "Did the woman in your dream wear black fur or white linen? And did she walk from the north wind or rise from the ash tree?" You stammer through your answers, realizing with each word that yes, you remember far too much, too. The scent of pine in her hair, the cold stones beneath your feet, the way she said your name like it was a prayer and a warning. The vulva nods, the room exhales. She declares you are bound by dream marriage. Dream marriage, of course, is not legally binding, unless the community agrees it is. And unfortunately for you, the community has already started sharpening its matchmaking knives. You would never think that imagining a mysterious woman by a frozen river would result in real-life wedding garlands and 3 dozen roasted eels. But here we are. For the record, Scholars still argue whether dream marriages in Norse society were seen as literal premonitions, symbolic metaphors, or just convenient excuses for weird engagements. In at least one saga, a man was pressured into marrying a woman who looked like his dream girl, even though she was technically his cousin and possibly also his enemy. Romantic, sure. Legally murky. Absolutely. Meanwhile, your best friend has started carving a ceremonial comb. You ask why. He shrugs and says, "It's tradition. You didn't ask for this tradition. You consider running." But running in Norway is just walking very briskly until you hit a cliff. You consider denial. But that ship sailed the moment your aunt started humming wedding songs in the background while gutting fish. So now, you're left with the strangest option of all: lean into it. What if this dream woman is real? What if she's out there, north of the glacier, east of the pine forest, somewhere the wind never stops moaning? You begin to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this was never about marriage at all. Maybe it's about finding her. And maybe, just maybe, the dream isn't finished yet. You pack like a man, caught between myth and responsibility. A small bundle of hard cheese, a hunk of dried fish, a woolen cloak that smells like smoked sheep. You slip your grandfather's iron knife into your belt and wrap your feet in sealskin. There's no heroic send-off, just your mother pressing a rune-carved charm into your palm and muttering something about "don't marry anything with hooves." You would never think that dream-induced engagement would result in a solo trek into wolf territory. But again, welcome to the 10th century. No map, no trail. Just that absurdly vivid dream seared into your brain, and the vague belief that the woman you saw is not only real, but also waiting. Somewhere, as you leave the village, the air feels different. Less like you're walking through pine forest, more like you're being swallowed by it. There's a hush in the trees that isn't weather. It's the kind of silence that makes you feel watched. Not in a hostile way, more like the mountains are judging your outfit. You trudge for hours, possibly days. Time starts to stretch, like badly tanned leather. Every stream you cross reminds you of the river in the dream. Every distant raven feels like a symbol. You get briefly excited when you spot a woman near a hillside, but she turns out to be a goat, wearing moss, which, frankly, is just rude. But then it happens. You find a trail of pale stones, oddly warm despite the cold. They curl through the brush like a breadcrumb path laid by fate itself. You follow. At the end of the trail is a lake so still, it looks like polished obsidian. No birdsong, no ripple, just that quiet glass surface. And in the center, a small island. And on that island, a woman in white. Yes, the woman from the dream. She sees you. She smiles, not the kind of smile people make when they're happy, but the kind that says, "You took long enough." She doesn't speak. She simply turns and begins walking across the water, which, by the way, is not how physics works. But again, welcome to Norse legend, where the laws of nature apply only to livestock and taxes. You follow waiting, not walking because you are, unfortunately, still made of bones and meat. The water is cold enough to insult your ancestors, but you press forward. On the island, she waits by a tree, shaped like a woman kneeling. The bark is carved with runes you don't recognize. She finally speaks, and what she says isn't in words. It's a memory. You suddenly know things you didn't before. Her name, her past, the fact that she was once real, once cursed, once abandoned at this very lake. Historians still argue whether such mythical women were symbolic stand-ins for trauma, lost love, or pre-Christian fertility spirits. Fringe scholars suggest this story might be an echo of older matriarchal rituals, preserved awkwardly in local lore. But all you know is she's looking at you like you're the final chapter she's been waiting for. She takes your hand, The sky ripples. The lake breathes. And just like that, you're no longer sure if this is a dream or if your life before this was... You blink. She's gone. And now you're standing alone on the island. Soaked, shivering, and somehow married. You don't return the way you came. You wake up sort of on a bed of moss that's too dry for the weather, under a sky that seems one notch brighter than normal. Birds chirp in a language that sounds suspiciously sarcastic. And your clothes are dry, which feels like a miracle or a mistake. You stand, dazed. The island is still there, so is the lake, but the woman is gone. And in her place, a carved stone, waist high, with symbols you now mysteriously understand. It reads, "You are bound." That's it. No signature. No thank you gift basket. Just the world's most cryptic marriage license. You would never think that binding your soul to a dream woman would come with bureaucratic runes. You start walking, because what else do you do after potentially marrying a lake ghost? The landscape feels vaguely altered. Trees grow in formations that spell things if you squint long enough. You pass a raven wearing a crown made of birch bark. He nods at you, politely. You're 60% sure that's not normal. Eventually, you stumble upon a hut that smells like wet fur and boiled hope. Inside is an old woman with more wrinkles than facial features, and a cat that seems to blink in time with your heartbeat. The woman doesn't look surprised to see you. Of course she doesn't. She offers you broth, made of something she won't name. You sip it anyway. She listens as you try to explain what happened. The dream, the woman, the water, the binding. You expect disbelief, maybe a cackle. What you get is a slow nod, and the phrase, "Ah, she's choosing again. Again." Apparently, this isn't the first time someone's been led by dreams to that lake, nor the second, nor the 15th. The woman you saw was once flesh and blood a seer, a healer, a something else that doesn't translate well. She had power, and people didn't like that, so they cursed her, or she cursed them, or both. Historians still argue whether she was an actual figure or a symbolic story repeated by bored bards with a flair for romance and horror. The old woman says, each generation, someone is called not to free her, not to rescue, but to remember, apparently. You're not here to save her. You're here so that she's not forgotten. Which feels romantic, tragic, and weirdly like being cast in a reboot of a myth you didn't audition for. You sleep that night in the old woman's hut, and in your dreams, you see her again. Not sad, not desperate, just present, watching. And then she whispers something so soft you almost miss it. "Now, you carry me." You wake up with your hand clenched around a single white stone, warm to the touch. The hut is gone. The cat is gone. You're alone in a meadow you don't remember walking into. And you laugh. Because of course you are. Married for a dream, no. More like married to one. You try to return home. Emphasis on try. The path winds strangely. The same bend keeps reappearing like a hiccup in space. Trees swap places when you're not looking. At one point, you swear a mushroom whistles at you. This forest does not obey physics. It obeys narrative logic. And apparently, you're not done being a character yet. You finally stumble into a village. Not yours. The buildings are vaguely familiar, timber-framed, thatched roofs, goats that look like they've seen things, but the language is off by a few syllables. Everyone speaks in a dialect that feels like a regional cousin to yours, and they squint at your clothes like you're wearing time itself wrong. You ask what year it is. They give you two answers, one with numbers, one with a feast name. Neither sounds right. Apparently, the Feast of the Stolen Bride is next week. You would never think that accidentally marrying a water spirit would throw off your calendar. And yet, you live among them for a bit. You don't have much choice. They assume you're a wandering monk who hit his head. You don't correct them. You help repair fences, trade stories for food, and try not to stare too long at reflective water, because sometimes she's there, just out of reach, in puddles, in the corner of your eye while rinsing a bowl. One time, in your tea, always watching, never speaking. One night, an elder pulls you aside during a gathering. She smells like fermented apples in divine disapproval. She squints at your face, mutters something about marked by moon lake madness, and tells you not to look into mirrors on Midsummer's Eve. You nod. Later, you look into a mirror on Midsummer's Eve. Naturally. What you see isn't your reflection. It's her, smiling, a sad, wide, too-knowing smile. She lifts a hand. So do you. Except her hand keeps moving. Yours doesn't. She mouths something. You don't know the language, but you understand it anyway. Keep walking. You wake up the next morning on the edge of your own village, or what used to be your village. Time has passed. Clearly, the fences are different. The kids are taller. Your house is not yours anymore. A goat lives there now, and quite confidently. You try to explain who you are, but names don't stick. You're not quite remembered, not quite forgotten. People nod politely and move on. You become a local oddity, the man who wanders, who talks to wells, who never marries, but wears a carved stone around his neck like a vow. Historians still argue whether this tale is based on real Norse oral tradition or some dreamy fusion of Celtic influence and bardic embellishment. But for you, it's not a story, it's just life. You keep walking. You whisper to the wind. You carry her name. You don't live so much as drift. The villagers call you the dream husband, though most aren't sure whether it's an insult, a legend, or a tragic local joke. You age gently, like moss on stone. Not fast, not slow, just deliberately. Your days revolve around quiet routines. You carve small wooden figures by the stream, feed them crumbs, and say apologies out loud for things only you remember. You never quite settle into one hut, but every hearth has a space for you. A bowl of porridge, a faded blanket, and still, the dreams. She visits less often now, and when she does, her shape is blurrier. Sometimes she's a wave, sometimes a face in a tree knot. One night, she's a deer with silver hooves who pauses just long enough to stare you down like a question you'll never answer. You would never think that marrying a dream would require this much. Maintenance, your carving changes. Gone are the goats, the ships, the runes. Now it's just her, over and over. Dozens of versions laughing, sleeping, dancing, crying, melting. The village kids trade them like charms. They think it's a game. You let them. But then one child brings you something different. A piece of blue glass. Not sea glass. Not polished. Just sharp, ancient, and deeply wrong. You feel your hands go cold. It smells like lake water. It hums like your name. You ask where she found it. She points in the north woods, near the old hollow. You don't ask which hollow. You already know. You wait until nightfall. You tell no one. You pack nothing. You walk. The trees remember you. The cold greets you like a cousin. The wind whispers the vowels of a language you almost forgot. You reach the hollow. You kneel, and you whisper her name. A long silence. Then a ripple not in the ground, not in water, but in air. Like breath held too long, finally released. Then she's there. Not as a full body. Not a ghost. Just a shimmer. A suggestion. She touches your cheek. It hurts and soothes at the same time. You say you're sorry. You don't know what for. Everything. Probably. She mouths something again. Same as before. Keep walking. But this time, her voice follows it. And it says your name. Mainstream historians still insist that tales like yours are symbolic enactments of pagan anxieties about spiritual union and geographic exile. which is a very long way to say, we don't get it, but we'll pretend we do. Meanwhile, folklore scholars whisper about river brides, dream packs, and the unsettling frequency of carved love tokens found in remote northern graves. You return to the village with nothing in your hands, but your eyes are different. The villagers notice. They don't ask. You carve a single final figure. You give it away. Then you stop carving. Now, you walk farther, sometimes uphill, sometimes toward nothing. But you walk, always toward her. Word count 592. Awaiting continue. Ban danoi. Continue. Chat GP danoi. Section 8. The villagers say, you've become part of the mist. Children dare each other to spot you at dawn, drifting between birch trunks like a wandering thought. You don't mind. You've let go of needing a name. You're not looking for answers anymore. Only echoes. One morning, a trader from the coast arrives with a bundle of iron charms and salt-dried fish. Over ale, he tells a tale he swears is true. Far up the mountain passes, near a forgotten fjord, there's a man who never eats, never sleeps, and never speaks unless the moon is full. He only hums strange, lilting tunes in a language no one knows, and sometimes, on foggy nights, a pale figure dances beside him on the cliffs, barefoot and laughing. You sip your broth quietly. You say nothing, but your lips twitch just slightly. The tale spreads, as tales do. Scholars try to map it, possibly symbolic of the tension between dream, realization, and medieval masculinity. One writes. Another argues you were a mystic. A third insists none of it happened. Just another love fantasy fabricated by desperate villagers during grain shortages. Of course, you don't really care what they think. What matters is that you begin to feel her again closer now. Warmer, not just in dreams, but in the lichen underfoot. The chill that doesn't bite. The taste of water pulled from glacier rocks. She's not outside of you anymore. She's not separate. She's every step. You reach a grove where the moss grows upward, a place no cartographer marks. The wind hushes when you enter. No birds call here. You kneel, palms flat on the ground, and whisper, I'm ready. There's no reply. Only a heartbeat, your own, and then weightlessness. Not the flying kind, the unbeing kind. The parting of stories. You close your eyes and feel her arms again. Not around you, but inside you woven. Quiet, certain. You aren't dreaming, not anymore. A shepherd boy finds your walking stick weeks later, standing upright in the center of that same moss grove, perfectly balanced despite no wind. He takes it home. His mother hangs it by the hearth. That night, she dreams of a woman with river-colored eyes who says, tell him to keep walking. She doesn't know what it means, but her son does. He takes the stick and goes. Historians still argue whether this tale is a warning, a love letter, or just a poetic attempt to cope with loneliness and snowstorms. Some think the carving boy was real. Others believe he was a metaphor for ambition that melts under mystical snowfall, where the moss grows thicker each year. And somewhere colder than maps, allow two shadows hold hands on a ridge that never existed. The path you once followed has faded, but it hasn't vanished. Not entirely. On cloudless nights, when the moon dips low over the fjords, and frost paints silver veins along barn doors and boots. There are those who claim to hear footsteps soft, steady, belonging to no one they know. No horse, no sled, no torch, just footprints in the snow, leading toward nowhere in particular, but never doubling back. Now, we ease into the final hush. You lie still, not because you're tired, but because you no longer need to go anywhere. Your body, if it still exists, is forgotten beneath centuries of lichen and legend. But your breath is the wind through pine needles, the hush in a lover's dream, the echo of a lullaby hummed across fjords. So, here you are, in the 10th century, the wood smoke curling from distant hearths, The scent of damp fur and salted fish. A world with no clocks and no certainty. Just fjords that yawn wider than memory, and people who believe that dreams aren't foolish, they're sacred. And in the village where your story began, the carving of the girl with sea glass eyes still sits above the doorframe. No one dares move it, not even during repairs. A local girl once asked why. Her grandmother only said, "It's for those who remember." They never explained further. Maybe you did marry for a dream, but dreams are curious things. They demand more than vows. They demand sacrifice, silence, and a willingness to follow shadows into fog. They're soft-spoken tyrants, beautiful liars, and once in a while, they come true. Some say your tale is one of love conquering fate. Others say it's a tragedy of obsession disguised as devotion. A few say it's neither, that you were just someone too quiet to say no to a vision. Historians still argue whether this kind of love was ever real, or if it was simply a poetic device to keep Norse epics interesting during especially long winters. But you don't argue. You rest. And above your resting place, wherever that may be, the northern lights occasionally break into spirals so delicate, so intricate, they almost resemble a signature, one no scholar can decode. But if you look closely, it always starts the same way, with two lines, joined at the center, like hands. The fire in the hearth has dimmed now. The voices have quieted. Your tale has unspooled its thread, and there's no need to wind it back. So you breathe slowly, calmly, as if listening to the snowfall, and sleep.